Every family is crazy, complicated, maybe intensely dysfunctional even. But some families, and especially some mother-daughter relationships, exist in worlds and stratospheres all their own. Karen von Hahn is a columnist with the Toronto Star. She's written a memoir that captures just such a turbulent universe. It's called What Remains: Object Lessons in Love and Loss. And it brings her to our studio tonight. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Nam.
It's very nice to have you here. I really enjoyed your book.
Thanks.
As we were talking before we started taping, having a daughter, I can relate to some of the things that you've written about. But I wanted to start at the beginning, and I think back, like, all our memories start with a series of mental still images. What are some of your earliest memories of your mother?
It's interesting when you say mental still images, I still think of photographs because somehow that's my generation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everything was documented. And so some of the sort of flash frozen images are photographs when I think about it. But my mother was a huge gesturer. She was big. I mean, the phrase larger than life really accurately describes her. She was superhuman. She was, she spoke loudly. She pronounced on things. You could hear her arrive in a room. She had a lot of presence. And I guess some of my freeze frame images are of her gestures, her cigarette. She was a lifelong smoker. Her smile, you know, she was a ready laugher. She lived life large, and she had a big laugh. What other things? Sort of gestures, the way she was physically.
And she was beautiful.
Very beautiful. She was always beautiful. That was very much a part of who she was, which I think is also why it was hard for her to get old. It's difficult for women, you know, to have a big personality and age gracefully. We're required to age gracefully, apparently, but that kind of means going away. And if you're that and being quiet and turning into a granny, which...
It must be difficult. Because I always joke that women expire like milk and men, you know, become like fine wine. They age like a fine wine.
Totally. Right? They are allowed to develop gravitas. Well, we don't really have that in our culture for women. And I really saw that with my mother.
Now, one of your last memories of your mother is she was gifting you these pearls.
Yes.
What significance do these pearls have for you?
Well, in the book, I really try to talk about and use objects as a way in to try and understand my mother.
The mirrors, the pearls.
Yes. Yeah. The last word she ever said to me, which is the opening of my book, was pearls. She didn't speak it because she couldn't speak at the time. She was hooked up to a breathing apparatus and machine in intensive care, and she took the time to spell out on an alphabet card the word pearls and point at me. She wanted me to have them. And I understood at that time, at that horrible moment, that she wanted to sort of pass on some kind of mantle to me. I am her eldest child. I'm the oldest of three. And she wanted me to wear this sort of symbol of her womanhood. She wanted to give that to me. I was to continue on as sort of the matriarch of our family. And in a way, it's an ill fit. I mean, they never really quite sit well on me. She had a certain panache and she could carry these. And I don't know, I'm still working on it.
They look great.
Oh, thank you.
But I'm thinking too, because in the book you write about your differences, when she did give you the pearls, because she could have given them to your sister.
That's right.
Were you touched by that, or were you surprised by that?
Well, I was surprised that that would be her last word. But in a way, it was so very her. She was a collector and curator of beautiful things and lived for beauty. She really did. And her beautiful things were extraordinarily important to her. And, you know, I'm a journalist and writer, and I've sort of studied the meaning of things myself, writing about style for the last 3 decades for newspapers and magazines. And it is really amazing how objects have meaning. We give them meaning through our lives. And, you know, people talk about consumer culture as if that's a bad thing. But really, it's much more primal than that. You know, we gather these things through our lives. These are the tokens, the totems, the you know, the things that twig memories through the years of all the sort of significant events. And in the end, what are we left with? We're left with the things of the person, the things that the person collected. And this is something very basic within us. You know, primitive peoples buried their things along with a dead person, right? Exactly, or along with themselves. And you know, these are our totems. And so I think in a weird way, I understood it was sort of a heavy thing that she was passing on to me. This idea of the pearls are now yours, and so I tried to use each object, that each chapter in the book is an object, and I tried to use it really as a metaphor and explore what we mean when we talk about pearls and what we think about pearls, say, that being one of the chapters. Sort of explore it and use it as a lens.
Now, as a mother of two, have you thought about some objects that you might pass on to your children?
Well, you know, you can't help feeling a bit that way. Everything takes on sort of a momentousness after you lose your mother. A mother is really huge. They're your first person.
And you're right, everybody has a mother.
Everybody has a mother. It is the
universal. So simplistic, but it's so powerful.
Well, this is it, and it's your first relationship. It's really your interface with the world, and it colors everything. I still hear my mother's voice in my head, and I can almost feel her presence in a strange way. It was so significant to me. It was my first love.
How many years has it been?
It's been 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
You write that the loss of your mother has completely rocked your world at the same time as it gave you a radical sense of freedom. Is the book a product of this freedom?
That's a very good question, and absolutely. In a way, this is a book I never could have written when she was alive. And losing her a little too early did give me the chance to say, well, there's no one left to hurt or offend or cross or disappoint. Those things have already happened. You know, the worst has already happened. The thing I feared, the thing I dreaded, I'm here. And so in a way, I'm free. There's nothing more to be scared of. It's all done.
What are you free of?
Her judgment, which was very important to me always. And now, really, I'm free not to care. So in a way that freed me creatively, and also charged me with a sense of urgency because, you know, I'm in middle age myself now. My children are grown, they're in their 20s, and you know, you start to get this sense of a burning desire to do something really hard. I wanted to do something that honored her. Because she was worth talking about.
You do write that she would have been pleased to know that here's someone who wrote a book about her.
I mean, it's very much a warts and all portrait. It's a gloves off portrait, but yet I think she would have still enjoyed being the subject of an examination and being talked about. So I'm proud in that way.
You describe your relationship with your mother as hardly perfect, but it was a passionate one. What was imperfect about your relationship with your mother?
Well, I wasn't her. I think that's always hard for a mother and daughter. I think it's something that we all struggle with in our relationships with our daughters because we think of them, we can't help thinking of them as some sort of projection of our own selves. You know, they must be like us, and they must suffer the same fears and anxieties and the same desires. They must be sort of a mini-me. And also, I think we're a little bit, I have a daughter and a son, and in truth, I think, I have to admit, my daughter is my eldest. That might be part of it. But I think also because she's a woman, I know how hard the world is for women. And I guess we really expect a lot from our daughters. Maybe slightly more than our sons, or we're more readily able to forgive our sons somehow.
I agree with that.
You do?
Because I have my daughter's turning 4, and I feel like I do have those kind of expectations of her already.
Already?
Yeah. Do you think there's a connection between imperfection and passion?
Wow, I think definitely there is. I think when you care a lot about each other, I mean, that's why family life is so fraught. It's so wonderful, but it's so intense. There you are living your lives together, and you have all this water under the bridge, all those resentments. They're petty at the time, all those fights, but they're ongoing and they kind of gather force. So over the years, the slightest sort of disagreement can take on this kind of malicious character, can quickly heat up into something really intense. And that's love. I mean, love comes with some pain. And I definitely learned that at home. I mean, I was very, very fortunate to grow up in a very loving and intense family, but there were a lot of raised voices and slammed doors too.
Love comes with some pain. I really find that interesting. How old do you think you were when you first learned that lesson?
I think I learned it probably quite young. I think I had a sense because I was with my mother a lot, being the eldest and having a mother who was young. She was herself only 22 when she had me. And she was at home trying to start a life and a career. She'd got pregnant probably earlier than she had wanted to in her own life. She was going to be Coco Chanel or Elsie DeWolf, and then I shut that down or delayed it anyway. And so I think I could sense some of her disappointment. And
as towards becoming a mother, or just towards you?
Her frustration. She was always, you know, very patient and loving. It wasn't directed at me necessarily, but I had a sense that she wasn't in the circumstance that she wanted to be in, and that she was wanting to have this huge life, and you know, she wasn't there yet. And so I understood some of her discomfort and her loneliness and her pain. I was with her, and we were very close.
Well, you write things to us were language we shared. What are some of the things that made you have a common language with your mother?
Well, I mean, when I talk about things here, I talk about objects. I mean, the things in our lives. It was an ongoing conversation about, oh, you know, darling, you really should have that table refinished. I can see, you know, you're not really taking care of that deco piece. Or, you know, dear, the best candles that you can possibly get would be the Concord candles, and you must buy them by the box. They're much less expensive. Just whatever the conversation was, always veered into the material. It is kind of the way family life does run, which is why it ends up being often the purview of women, the hunting and gathering of the objects and the things that a family needs in their daily lives. And that's sort of what women and homemakers do. There's the tending of the things and the gathering of the things, the tending to everybody's needs.
That's your purpose.
It is a little bit. You take on that role, the fussing with all the things. So in many ways, and my mother really she was a connoisseur, a great connoisseur of, she was an interior designer, and really had an innate sense of style, personal style. But she wanted me to know these things. And so I was getting this sort of lifelong tutelage in, you know, that, of course, is Georgian. You can tell by these lines, or this is a perfect example of Art Deco, dear.
Do you think that was her way of connecting with you, because that's the language that she understood?
It was a language that was important to her. She wanted me also to be a connoisseur. That this was, to her, a sign of sophistication. It was something that she wanted me to know about and learn.
I would like to read something that you wrote. If my mother had been born in Salem, Massachusetts, during the time of the witch hunts, I have absolutely zero doubt that she would have ended up burned at the stake. I mean, I'm kind of giggling as I read this, but what did she do that would have been seen as witch-like?
Well, she had an uncanny sense of what it was everybody was thinking, or what it was that was really intended. She read between the lines. In fact, she never really read the lines. She really danced to her own drummer. So
she said what she thought.
She always said what she thought, and she never held back. That was the thing. I mean, she was an enormous personality, but she was also crazy witchy. I mean, she told me I was pregnant, and I had no idea.
And she also told you you were going to marry the person that you end up marrying.
Absolutely.
Do you think that, did you inherit her intuitive skills?
No. Unfortunately not. I'm the opposite. I'm clueless. And I actually think that that's an unfortunate side effect of the mother and daughter relationship. You know, one of you excels at one thing, especially if your mother has gifts in a certain direction. You don't necessarily inherit them or pick them up. In fact, you probably are more wired differently than they are.
You write that your daughter Sophie was very much like your mom.
Oh, very much.
Is she intuitive?
Totally. So I think my mother's sort of uncanny sense really skipped a generation.
Your parents came from different worlds. Your mother was an Anglican who converted to your father's religion. What did your domestic multiculturalism look like?
Well, it was funny because, you know, but this was, of course, early days because my parents, I was raised in the 60s and 70s. So this sort of multiculturalism was new, these, you know, intercultural families. So it wasn't like we had a lot of other couples that we knew or other families that we knew that shared our traditions. So in general, my mother, you know, converted to Judaism and my father was very controlling, and Judaism was really very important to him. So the practice. So my mother we really grew up in a Jewish household, but you know that it was funny because we would also celebrate Christmas. I mean, my father wouldn't allow a Christmas tree at our house.
Did that upset you?
Well, no, because that's just the way things were. But we would go to my mother's parents, my maternal grandparents, for like a faux Christmas every year before Christmas. That was sort of our Jewish Christmas party that we would have with them. It was really strange. We would work at our own kind of practice.
But for you, what was it like? You were half Anglican, half Jewish. Was it challenging at school? Like, what was it difficult trying to figure out who you were?
It gave me a rather unique perspective. I certainly didn't feel part of, you know, the perfect sort of Rosedale or Forest Hill WASP establishment. I always felt a little bit outside. You know, we were raised in sort of prosperous neighborhoods in Toronto, and those tended to be populated with sort of old money, you know, WASP names. And so we really came to that very differently. It was odd because physically we could sort of pass. We were sort of invisible minority was really the experience. We had very different attitudes. I mean, my parents were extremely liberal, and you know, politically as well as socially, and were very open in their conversations about sex, or you know, there weren't secrets, and it was
embarrassing
the 70s.
conversations.
Oh, constantly embarrassing conversations. They refused to be unembarrassed. They refused to be embarrassed. They just didn't take that on. They thought that was very ordinary. And so, you know, they would just sort of were living in their own bubble that they had created that really had nothing to do with most people we knew. So we were often out of touch, my siblings and I.
What was your dad like? Didn't he used to park his cars wherever he wanted? Like, what was he like?
My father was incredibly singular as a person. He was also very, very beautiful, remarkable looking.
6'4", blonde.
Yeah, huge blonde, very confident. You know, could walk into a room and people were knocked out by his presence. And he was complete. What went with that whole thing was that he was completely arrogant, and he just sort of arrived as if he was the prince, and everyone should treat him that way. And the most hilarious part was mostly that worked for him. I don't know. Everybody sort of fell into line and treated him like he really was special.
I want that confidence.
Yeah, it was impressive. It was impressive. Yeah. But it was funny having parents like that who acted like they were very important, because it was, on the one hand, sort of fun, and everybody would say, you know, my friends would come over and say, oh God, your parents are so cool. You know, it was kind of fun having my mother pick me up in her, you know, convertible Mustang with her Yves Saint Laurent blouse on and giant sunglasses, and she was like, darling, you know, she was fun. And my parents were different than everybody else's parents, and I knew that. But there was also sort of embarrassing. So I think the reason I never really fully inherited their swagger was because I was also nervous. I could tell that other people were sometimes a little bit turned off by it, and I was the one who had to make everybody else feel okay. So you behave differently because you have a different role.
You described growing up in a home that was both privileged and volatile. What caused the volatility?
Well, I think that there wasn't really room in our house for the two enormous personalities that my parents had. I also think that my mother really, history hadn't quite caught up with her ambition, and she came from a fairly middle-class, very ordinary Southern Ontario town, St. Catharines, and from a very lovely middle-class family that didn't really think that their daughter should necessarily be a world-famous designer. Why would she even have those aspirations? So I think she came to her early marriage. I mean, she fell madly in love with my father, who was an exotic, rare bird to her. And
did she meet him while she was on a date or something?
yeah, she met him. That was typical. That would be one of my mother's stories that she would tell about meeting my father, that she had been brought there by somebody else as a date to a wedding. And my father walked up and she just thought he was fabulous. And he said, "Oh, and your name is Susan? Oh," and sent her date off. "Susan, what would you like to drink?" Sent her date off to fetch drinks for the two of them. And my mother would say, and off the guy actually went. So my mother was smitten immediately with my father's arrogance and certain sort of attitude. She liked the way he rolled.
Well, the relationship became strained. Did you always know it was strained, or did you just think that's how parents were?
Well, I think that it became more strained as time went on. You know, their personalities clashed and their disappointments mounted. My mother started to have significant health problems, and she was quite disappointed. And what I wanted to say earlier and didn't get to was that, you know, I think she sort of suffered a generational disappointment. You know, my friends and I were, you know, encouraged to work outside of the home and really try to fulfill our ambitions and dreams. And in many ways, she was really thwarted by our existence, by having a husband who really ruled the roost, like he was the rooster. And I think that was very dampening to her. And, you know, she became bitter with disappointment.
And then as she got older, her beauty faded, then her purpose.
Yeah, it's an old story, but it was sad to watch.
You were a teenager in Toronto in the 70s. How do you recall and compare that decade to the Toronto your kids grew up in?
Oh, it's so different. I mean, that Toronto was much smaller. Really, it was a small city. It wasn't a cosmopolitan city in many ways. It was quiet. That being said, it was fun and funky, and there was a sort of a pluck to the town that was great. But what was really different about the 70s is that, and what I feel sad about for my children today, because of course it's way more fun now and global and connected and so much going on. But what was great was there was this wonderful idealistic quality to growing up in the 70s. You felt like the world was going to be a better place, and we were all getting there. And also, nothing was wrong. You were, you know, encouraged to explore, and, you know, things weren't bad, and everybody wasn't worried about, you know, all the terrible things that were going to happen to you. It was really very positive, idealistic, if misguided time.
You could play on the street and not worry about your kids.
Totally. Yeah, we were allowed to do anything, and there was no fear. People weren't as afraid.
How would you explain to someone who has never known the comforts that you grew up with, the cost, like benefit of growing up rich? What's the best and worst thing about it?
Well, the best thing, I guess, is, of course, you can really do whatever you want. And I was wonderfully spoiled. And my parents, of course, didn't really believe that you could spoil a child. You know, they thought that was a petty attitude. So we never had things like, you know, money every week that was just ours, and we had to budget or anything. My parents didn't believe in any of those things. They felt that that was really picayune. So, you know, they were grand, and you benefited from the grandeur. We traveled, and I was always beautifully dressed, and our houses were wonderful. I guess the only disadvantage would be that your experience is sort of removed from most people's experience. So you feel, I think when you're the product of that upbringing, it's hard to feel that you're competent or you could be successful as a self-reliant human being. I really had to learn that I was a functional person when I was an adult. I really didn't have a lot of summer jobs. My parents discouraged that kind of thing. So I really had to build my own confidence that I was, in fact, a worthwhile human being on my own terms as an adult later.
And now you have this book, which is such a great accomplishment.
Thank you.
You have 2 siblings.
Yes.
Have they read the book, and what do they think?
You know, they're just reading it now.
Are you nervous about the reaction?
I am nervous
Why?
about the reaction because, you know, I'm very, very honest in the book, which I really was a stretch for me. You know, I write about style, and which is not a personal subject, and I always stayed away from writing about my own self and my own life because I always felt it wasn't anybody's business. But this time, because I wanted to do something really hard and really challenging and outside of my own comfort zone, I really just threw it all in there. I have no more secrets. And so I hope that my siblings take that and understand that I've tried to really not make it a story that is their story, but really a story that's my story and my experience in our home growing up.
You say no secrets, but was there anything that you kind of shied away from going into too much detail?
Well, I didn't really tell their stories. I thought that it's important for my brother and sister to be able to tell their own stories. So I definitely tried to be honest about what happened but at the same time, you know, not expound on what the meeting was for either of them.
It's a great book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here, Karen.
My pleasure.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.